We have David Johns on the show. David is the executive director of National Black Justice Coalition. Remarkable background, known for his passion for public policy, fierce advocacy for youth. He's enthusiastic about equity. On September 1st, 2017, David Johns began his new life and new chapter as the executive director for the National Black Justice Coalition. Has a long resume dedicated to the empowerment of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people, including people living with HIV/AIDS. He's also pursuing a PhD in sociology and education policy at Columbia University. Take it from me, condolences to you, brother, because you are a walking zombie right now in the PhD program. But thank you for being on the show.
Story of my life. Thank you for having me.
Man, first of all, let's talk about the Equality Act. There's a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation around the Equality Act. It's passed the House, headed to the Senate. Its future is uncertain, but unpack that. What is the Equality Act?
Yeah, appreciate the question. The Equality Act is the most recent attempt to ensure that all Americans have equal access to the programs and resources that allow us to get close to the American dream. The 3 points to underscore that are that it builds upon existing foundational federal non-discrimination legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. It fills existing gaps that are again designed to provide clear and consistent federal protections to really deny people the opportunity to discriminate when providing public goods or operating a public business, public accommodations, things like ride shares and Uber, but also preventing the use of government resources and government-sponsored programs or services from being able to be denied access or deny access to opportunity to people. So that's one. The second thing is that for LGBTQ people in particular, the act provides clear and consistent protections so that we cannot be discriminated against based on our actual or what people might assume to be our sexual identity, our gender orientation, our expression. So it builds upon the Supreme Court's most recent actions in the Bostick decision, which prevents federal discrimination regarding employment, but acknowledges that it doesn't really mean much that you can't deny me access to a job once I have it if I can't get close to show up at the job interview in a way that is presentable or expected of me, or have access to public housing, which is often required as a prerequisite for being able to complete a job application. And then finally, the bill also provides protections for young people. Right now, LGBTQ youth do not have access to the same federal protections as their non-LGBTQ counterparts. Poor white people who are discriminated against because they live in rural, isolated, small communities or otherwise don't have access to the same resources that someone else might have access to are also protected. And so those are three, I hope, points to illustrate that this is the most recent attempt to ensure that we all have fair access to a level playing field that is consistent with the way that we talk about liberty and equality in our country.
Why do you think conservatives primarily, why do you think they're fighting against the idea, the notion of the Equality Act?
I'm clear that anyone who believes in supports, otherwise benefits from white supremacy and anti-blackness would fight against the passage of the Equality Act in the same way that people fought against the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act of the 90s, the Civil Rights Acts of '64 and '63, and so many other pieces of legislation, not only at the federal level, but at the local and the state level that are designed to ensure that we fill these gaps, gaps that have existed again because of how white supremacy and attempts to preserve privilege for some while denying it to others, how that works. And we should all be clear that attempts to deny access to federal protections is a way to try and hide bigotry and bias and hate. All things that we, at this moment in time, especially when we think about this moment of the movement for Black lives, should be well beyond debating and should all be committed to upholding as people who purport to care about the American dream.
David, because man, you are really a sociologist, okay? So let me ask you this question in the social context. Every time there's a religious freedom bill, because this is the big thing, they say, oh, this is going to violate religious freedoms, especially states in the South, right? So all these lawmakers and supporters, they come out and say, this is bad because it doesn't allow me to express my religion. Why is it that every single religious freedom bill only gives people the freedom to be discriminatory? Why is it we don't have one religious freedom bill that actually brings coalitions together? Why is that?
I don't know if I can answer that question. What I can answer is affirming, rather, that freedom of religion is important. Everyone should have access to demonstrate commitment to faith in ways that make sense to them, and the right to do so is already enshrined in the First Amendment. And so what I want to be clear about is that the ways that the right, in this point, the Republican caucus and the Senate are attempting to stonewall, word used intentionally, the advancement of the Equality Act is simply an attempt to hide bias and bigotry in the name of righteousness or in the name of religion. I'm the grandson of a Black Baptist preacher. Religion is important to me. And my practice of religion should never impinge upon someone else's right to liberty or to access to fundamental services. And if at no time in our country should this be any clearer, it is now when we think about the implications of COVID, when we think about the recent emergency in Texas, where my parents are from. Too often, Black people, women, people who are LGBTQIA+ are denied access to critical services that too many people take for granted. And the Equality Act is a way to provide federal protections so that in moments where someone might want to do that, they are not protected federally in doing so.
You know, this is one of those opportunities in American legislation where we can actually address inequity, right? So we call it the Equality Act, but we're really trying to address inequity, disparities that exist in systemic models. And one thing about system disparity is that it's so indoctrinated, so ingrained in the everyday cycle of that institution that for the most part, many don't even see it. They don't even recognize the implicit bias that permeates through that organization. And so legislation like this awakens us to the idea and it makes it front and center. But you have very learned lawmakers who are well aware of the implicit bias of these systems. And they're fighting against it, disguising the fight as a religious freedom fight, but it's really a fight to maintain their white supremacy, their bigoted stance, and their voting base of bigots that support them, right?
Yep. Yes, most definitely. And the thing that is most important to me in this context is too often people who are voting in support of people who benefit from their positions of privilege don't benefit similarly. So I want to highlight again, this isn't just about LGBTQ people, but women on the basis of sex, poor white folks, other communities of color, and Black folks generally, but especially Black LGBTQIA folks, all benefit when we fill these foundational gaps that exist federally.
What would your argument be to those in the Senate on the Republican side who are, launching, I guess, I would say the strongest adversarialness to this idea? What would you say to them to try to soften or massage it so that this could actually pass with a 60-vote Senate?
My question is, do you believe in an America where everyone is treated equally and has access to opportunity? This is the myth that we export globally and have for centuries, for a lot longer than I believe that I have been alive. And if you believe in treating everyone equally and everyone having access to the American dream, then you should support passing the Equality Act. That is the question that this bill allows us to ask and answer. Do we believe that everyone should be treated in the way that we want to be treated? Do those in positions of power believe that those who are not in positions of power deserve access to the same resources that make us Americans? That for me is the conversation to be had, and it's not really a debate. The answer is clear. Yes, if you do support the Equality Act and fill in these foundational gaps, acknowledging that this is where we are in this moment, And if your answer is no, then my hope is that what we've seen based in recent elections in Georgia, when we think about the presidential election, the sea change we saw in terms of the purple wave and the increase in LGBTQIA representatives, not only federally, but throughout the states, throughout the country, should indicate that if people answer no, then they will be held accountable.
I want to remind people that the Nonpartisan Public Religion Research Institute found that nationally, support for a bill like the Equality Act was over 70%, all right? Which includes a majority of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, as well as other organizations. And it was endorsed by over 600 organizations, including civil rights, education, healthcare, the list goes on and on. This has the people's support. I just want to remind folks of that. So literally you have conservative lawmakers, once again, contrary to the will of their own constituents. My man, give out your social media. How can people follow you, check you out?
Yeah, I appreciate that and the space to have this conversation. We are NBJC on the move across digital platforms. We have a really beautiful dynamic new website at nbjc.org. And I am Mr. MR David, DAVID JOHNS across platforms as well.
Thanks, David. Good luck on that PhD program, man.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.